mini PC motherboards. I mean, this is an ITX motherboard, but it's got the CPU built in. It's the BD895i SE. And this is the 7000 series. This is a machine built around the 7000 series that we've been using in the office for a while. But I've also got other machines that are kind of console builds and console killers. And I actually want to talk about the console form factor and like how things are evolving. If you've been watching our videos for a long time, you know that I've sort of predicted that maybe at the small form factor side of things, normal ATX builds might be subsumed by stuff like this, because this is easier to cool and easier to deal with. Well, it also turns out that there are others in the community and others that are thinking along the same lines, but it turns out the answer might be that we need a new form factor, especially with the price pressures and everything else that we're facing. So let's see how these builds have held up over time and how things have evolved and what's actually happening in front of us, because the component shortage may accelerate this. And this also has some related thoughts that go with the Steam Machine. Let's check. Okay. Console killer videos are really popular, but when we say console killer, are we killing the console because of price? In which case, form factor may not matter. You may be able to get a big desktop PC that is an old business class machine, super cheap. Throw a GPU in there. That's a perfectly valid strategy for killing a console and maybe more cost effectively. A little harder to do that in the component shortage that we have now, but next generation consoles are almost upon us, and likely they're going to be really expensive. Valve with their Steam Machine, that's going to be a Linux-based PC basically, but it's not upgradable. It's not componentized. It's not modular, and we don't know what the cost is going to be. Probably $1,000, give or take. This situation over the last couple of years has led to companies like Minisforum making these motherboards, which are based on a laptop CPU, but they're putting a laptop CPU in an ITX motherboard. This has 2 NVMe slots. It has a built-in heatsink. All you have to do is add cooling and memory to this, SODIMM memory, laptop memory, which at the time that I do this video is slightly cheaper than desktop memory. And you have a fully operational system. Now this has a built-in GPU, not a great one, but it'll get the job done if you're not gaming. We built this machine that has been in continuous operation around another Minisforum motherboard. This is in a fractal case. If the case looks attractive, you can check that out. This has got the MSI 4070 Ti in it, and you can see the motherboard here mounted behind our Arctic cooler. This system has been fantastic. It's based around a 7945 HX. If you look at Minisforum as a board vendor, they are not an Asus, a Gigabyte, an MSI, or an ASRock. They are not at that tier. They don't have BIOS updates super frequently. They don't, there are customer support horror stories on the internet, but by and large, they've been growing and they've been using their growth to provide better support, some BIOS updates. Like if you go to the support page on Minisforum, there are some BIOS updates. The motherboard in this got, I think, 2 BIOS updates, which is not a lot. If you look at the BIOS updates for like any given ASRock motherboard, like the one in our in-case M1 case here, this is full ITX with a full power supply. I mean, this is a relatively tiny case, but it's so awesome. It's a fun build. This motherboard has a lot more BIOS updates than the Minisforum update. At the same time, it's like, okay, we have the 8000 series CPU. Here is an update. This board is just refreshed. It has 2.5 gig Ethernet, USB Type-C, 4-pin fan header. It's basically exactly the same motherboard, just with a different CPU. This is the X3D version. This is the non-X3D version. A more direct comparison would be the BD895i. This is the 895, so they've refreshed the CPU a little bit. Not a huge number of differences, but for building a console killer and balancing price and performance, this is a really good option. This has proven to be an incredible option since we've had it, and it has been a very reliable system with X3D and Vcache and that sort of stuff. The alternative, for console killer is you go this route, but you're going to lose out on price. I mean, both of these are kind of designer cases, and the N-Case M1 is even more low volume designer case. I get the Dr. Zaber, remember the Dr. Zaber Sentry? We did videos on the Dr. Zaber Sentry. This is Dr. Zaber is thinking along the same lines as I am, but I'll get there in just a second. The other thing that I want to talk about is Strix Halo. Strix Halo 128 gig, $2,000 console killer. It doesn't make any sense. When I did my video talking about Strix Halo machines, this one from GMK Tech, we also did the Framework Desktop. Check those videos out. I poo-pooed the 32 gig version. Why would you get a non-upgradable 32 gig version where you're locked into 32 gigs? In the memory drought that we're in, that can make sense, especially if the total package price is really good. Generally, I think something like this is going to make more sense. And yeah, the APU is going to be a little bit faster for the AI use case. But with 32 gigs of memory, like the reason that you would buy it for the AI use case is you're getting at least 64 gigs of memory, probably going for the 128. And yeah, that's going to cost a lot more now than when those videos launched. But from a gaming perspective and a console perspective, 32 gigs in something like this will make a perfectly reasonable living room machine. Now, it's not going to be as fast as a Steam machine, but 1080p 60 gaming in most titles at medium-high settings, yeah, Clair Obscur, Cyberpunk, AAA titles, the APU option is definitely an option. Now, in our GMK Tech configuration, it's a mini PC. In our Framework Desktop configuration, it's an ITX motherboard. You could throw it in whatever you want. You could go this route and save even more money because it's not really upgradable. Or you could go the ITX case route and put it in something like this or this, and you still have to buy a power supply and all the stuff that goes with that. The problem that you run into when you're doing those kind of builds, though, is compatibility. GPU compatibility. 2 slots. Do we need another standard? What about flow-through and cooling design and all that sort of stuff? This is the Falcon Northwest T-Key, and I've taken the side off and the components out to show you its flow-through design. Falcon was, I think, the first, if not the first, one of the first, to have this kind of a GPU flow-through design. And this can easily handle a 5090. It can handle beyond a 5090, like an RTX Pro 6000. But I think that if you're doing a build like this in the console killer context, you've missed out on price. Like, this is going to be orders of magnitude faster than a console, especially for like AI and everything else use case. And this can be a no compromises build. 8 cores, X3D V-cache, 16 cores. Falcon has an option for that in this configuration. This is an awesome, I can't say enough awesome things about this case and this build because it is literally no compromises, but in a console-like format, and it's a tower and the flow-through design and actually has good cooling. This is a new-ish Sentry design from Dr. Zaber. This is not finalized, and this is not going to be released in this form, but this is a little smaller than a Sentry, and if you remember from our Sentry videos, Dr. Zaber talks about how, flow-through design, it's a similar sort of GPU option. There's a GPU bay. This is designed for a 2-slot GPU. It can be a 2-slot GPU like this. It can be a modern 2-slot GPU that has more of a flow-through design. There's a little bit of one here on our Sapphire 2-slot GPU. But this kind of thing, Dr. Zaber was running into the same thing. It's like, okay, there's a lot of 2-slot GPUs out there, but they're not necessarily going to work in this case because where does the power supply cable exit, like the 12-volt cable? What kind of 12-volt cable is it? We have new front-to-back GPUs that actually hide where the power connector is so that you can route the cable appropriately. But if it's sandwiched in a small case like this, it's going to be a little problematic. Certainly, Valve ran into these issues and has sidestepped them all by not having really an upgradable platform. Something like this would be relatively inexpensive to produce in volume because there's not a lot of metal here. But again, it still has a standard SFX power supply. You can put an ITX motherboard in here. I've got our ASRock motherboard, our ASRock ITX motherboard that will fit in here. But cooling becomes a little bit of a concern because you really don't have a lot of cooling envelope other than just the height of your motherboard. And so you really would want to use a CPU in here that is on the order of like 65 watts. Our Fractal case is a lot more flexible in terms of cooling. You could put a 240 AIO in there. Our Encase M1, a lot of people are doing fancy custom loop builds in here for water cooling. Some people have put a 5090 in here or something like that. I think a design like the Tiki from Falcon Northwest makes a lot more sense and is a lot easier to build in. SFX power supply, ITX motherboard, it's a little thicker, a little bit better cooling options. Like I say, you can get some of the higher wattage CPUs in there, higher than 65 watts or 55 watts. But it kind of makes a lot of sense. I think this is also driving the need for gamers to ask for a standardized form factor for 2-slot GPUs. There isn't a 5090 out there that's 2 slots other than the Founders Edition from NVIDIA. And the Founders Edition 5090 is the only one that will fit in a Tiki. Like, there is no other 5090 option that makes sense here. Well, I mean, unless you get like really, there's not really an option. Practically, there's not really an option. If you're going to go for a build like this, obviously the bang for the buck play is going to be AMD. And it's going to be AMD like 9060 XT, 9070 XT, and then hunting a true 2-slot 9060 or 9070 XT that has the power supply in the appropriate location to minimize the build footprint and also noise footprint and also cost footprint and also making it an actual console starts to become a little problematic. This design from Dr. Zaber definitely works better in a tower configuration like the Tiki versus a desktop configuration. It can work in a desktop configuration, or at least the old Sentry design would work in a desktop configuration because we use it like that with rubber standoffs. That was fine, but again, we're not using 150 watt CPU. We're not using a 400 watt GPU or anything like that. AMD, for their part of it, they're kind of aware and kind of tapped into this. They have eco mode for their CPUs. And it's like, oh, I'm going to put this in eco mode. It's going to be 45 watts or 120 watt TDP CPU running at 65 watts. It's cooling, heat, and noise are a lot easier to manage. But you're still paying for 120 watt CPU. So a lot of the time when you do one of these high-end builds, you're still paying a little bit more than you would have to or you're leaving performance on the table. Like, you're not getting from the machine what you paid. If you opt for something like the BD895i SE for your build, the performance is really good. Like the benchmarks, like here is the performance of our 795 X3D, and here is the performance of our BD895i. And this is taking into account the cooling and all of the other parameters when using a 4070 Ti on this platform on a relatively compact, fractal case. But you could use another inexpensive case. You could use something like this. Maybe this should be its own build video. Dr. Zaber also has a concept for just such a 2-slot GPU. This is really kind of inspirational. It's like they're looking at this and saying, okay, maybe we can make this the standard for what the GPU should be. So your case really just ends up being a metal frame to carry the motherboard and the graphics card. And so for this design, it's kind of similar to MSI's front to back design in that the power connector is here and it's hidden. And so it's designed so that the cable comes in here and there's a little cutout for the heatsink. But it doesn't really impede with the airflow. It doesn't really impede with any of that. And you can see that it is less than a 2-slot card. And so this is just a concept. This is just 3D printed. But this, as a form factor, it's like, oh, this is the console form factor. This is the kind of thing that manufacturers should get behind. And if you're combining that with something like this, then you really have something special. Now, if you wanted to spend more money and have a higher end build that's based on a full ATX motherboard with a full AM5 socket, you totally could. But having used this thing for, I think, the last year or so, the 795 X3D, it was an incredible deal. It remains an incredible deal because, yeah, it's not as fast as an AM5 X3D processor, but it's still an X3D processor, and it still performs really well. And now it'll be even more sought after because, it's fine with DDR5 5600 notebook memory, and you can use a higher end GPU. I mean, you could use a 5090 on this platform, and it would be fine. You could be a little limited in CPU scenarios, but you get most of the value of a 5090. But I don't think a 5090 makes sense for a console killer build. And to be clear, I think part of the conversation here should be that when you're replacing a console build, it doesn't just perform better than a console, it costs less and could actually work in your living room. The Falcon Tiki can work in your living room, but it is like the most extreme maximum overkill console sized machine ever. There's 10 pounds of awesome and 5 pounds of console there. It is something. And there is a lot of, love and joy from building an in-case M1 and supporting projects like that, or the small form factor machines like Fractal. But a lot of people just want to get, the best bang for their buck. And that can be a board like Minisforum, even though it is not a mainstream board. And there are other brands out there other than Minisforum, but I've been running this thing for a year and it's been fine. And to be clear, Minisforum did not sponsor this video or anything like that. I just ordered $1,000 worth of stuff for them to use around here at the office, which I'll have a video on that later. They do send boards and stuff like that occasionally, but we also buy a lot of stuff from Minisforum. So I think the more important conversation here is that form factors are changing because products like this are going up in popularity. And even though there are some warts around support and everything else like that, it is really popular among builders because this, being a notebook CPU, is easier to manage from a heat and thermal and noise situation. And so in a living room, that makes sense. They can work really well. It can also make sense on top of your desktop or anything else like that. But GPUs have become a problem because pretty much all the reasonable performance GPUs have giant heat sinks, sometimes unnecessarily. The power routing is inconvenient because if this were on top, then it's not going to work in a build like this where otherwise it totally would work. And so you could make the case larger, but then you have a lot of wasted space in the case. The flow-through design makes a lot of sense when you have a GPU like that because flow-through design, it's proven. It works really well when the GPUs are designed with that in mind. Okay, so here's the MSI Ventus 3X PZ. This is one of the front to back. I'm actually doing a separate front to back build. Like the full case, motherboard, power supply. MSI has some good front to back options. But even though this GPU is explicitly a front to back GPU, really that just means that they've put the power connector in a different place that's more convenient. Instead of having it on the side here, you can get to it here, there actually. So the cable will come out this way, and it can come through this gap. I mean, you could go through the hole in the metal plate. It's got magnets to put it on. This is a good design, but this is a 3-slot design, and it's kind of big, and it's a flow-through design, and this is maybe a little bit too much wattage for that console build. So it's 5070 Ti. Like, this is the floor of 5070 Ti performance in physical envelope, and certainly this design is good in terms of cooling, but it can be a little problematic for what I'm talking about when it's like, I just want a quiet machine for the living room, So all I'm saying is it would be nice to have GPUs have this is a 2-slot design, this is the maximum length, and we've taken some considerations for where the power cord is located. And you, watching this video, have the power to, vote with your comments or wallet or whatever and make that happen. It doesn't have to be the highest end build. Like a 9060 in this form factor would be fine, even if it's a little power limited. But I can tell you it's not going to be a lot power limited, like 5, 10 watts, 15 watts, something like that is an entirely reasonable thing. And yeah, we need more of this kind of thing going into the shortage. And I don't know if that's going to be like 8 or 12 gig GPUs, probably not 16 gig GPUs, but are we going to go back to 10 gig GPUs? I don't know. I don't know what's coming for the future of that. So I've got this Dr. Zaber prototype, and I've got this and a build and some other ideas. What would you like to see? What questions do you have? Like, I'm thinking about a use case where you've got a machine like this in your living room, and you have a laptop that doesn't have a DGPU, but technologies like Steam, streaming, and that sort of stuff, you could use your laptop and play games on your laptop at 60 FPS streamed from the living room machine. Maybe that makes sense. Or maybe you have a desktop computer that you play games from on your living room machine and your laptop, and you have some other type of machine, a really inexpensive mini PC that is connected to your living room machine. And then that way you don't have to have 2 or 3 GPUs, or you don't have to have multiple machines that have 8 or 16 gigabytes of memory because everything is too expensive. How are you using that? Where do you see yourself doing that in the next year? I'm really curious to know. Hit me up in the comments below or in the forum or something like that. I think that this kind of thing is evidence that the prediction I made a long time ago, which is, putting a Ryzen 5 in a small form factor machine, or even buying, a full featured ITX motherboard is not going to make economic sense versus this kind of thing. And it may end up supplanting or replacing some of those low end chips, like anything less than 8 cores, or, maybe even the 8 cores, excluding specialty processors like the X3D, because you could get, a 12-core mobile processor that's better in most ways. Yeah, the connectivity here isn't as good on the motherboard, but on an ITX motherboard, the connectivity is not great there either. Even like micro ATX or ATX motherboards, there's not Not really a ton of slots. From a PCIe lane standpoint, yes, this is definitely less lanes than a desktop AM5 CPU, but not by a lot. So, yeah, I don't know. It's been fun. It's a level 1 ramble, but yeah, I don't know. Fun times. Fun times going into the winter of our discontent for PC components and that sort of stuff. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on this sort of stuff. I'm one of those level 1. If you have thoughts, engage below or in the forums at level 1. I'm curious to know what you think. All right, I'm signing out and I'll see you there.